Welcome back to Market Headlines. The government expects Indonesia's state budget deficit to remain wide next year to provide room for efforts to support economic recovery and structural reforms. The government expects Indonesia's state budget deficit to remain wide next year to provide room for efforts to support economic recovery and structural reforms amid the pandemic-induced uncertainty. The government has proposed 2.74 quadrillion rupiah or 186 billion US dollar in state expenditure next year, while state income is expected to reach 1.77 quadrillion rupiah. The resulting budget deficit is therefore projected to reach 971.2 trillion rupiah or 5.5% of the GDP next year, which compares to an estimated 6.34% of GDP this year as government continues its stimulus next year to start economic activity. President of Republic of Indonesia Joko Widodo assured the public that the deficit would be funded using secure financing sources and would be prudently managed. By optimizing the budget deficit, the government plans to provide 356.5 trillion rupiah or 24.04 billion US dollar in stimulus spending next year to bolster the economic recovery and procure the coronavirus vaccines. From all sources, IDX Channel. So viewers, starting from a health problem, the impact of the COVID-19 pandemic has spread to social problems, economic problems, and even to the financial sectors. Many countries have handled extraordinary things, especially through fiscal stimulus. Information regarding fiscal stimulus in a number of countries is in the first graphic. Let's take a look. So this is fiscal strategy amidst COVID-19 pandemic. United States of America, or US, allocates 13.6% of its GDP for fiscal stimulus, while the GDP growth in the second quarter minus 9.5%. And one of the biggest economic in European Union, Germany, posted minus 11.7% GDP growth in the second quarter of 2020, while the country has allocated 24.8% of its GDP for fiscal stimulus, while the other country with the fiscal stimulus 6.2% of its GDP, and it's quite good in the second quarter, while posted 3.2% or positive GDP growth in the second quarter of this year. While we compare to Indonesia, President Joko Widodo say that in the 2020 fiscal deficit, it has been widened to 6.34% of GDP, while second quarter of GDP growth in this year minus 5.32%. So we can say that allocation of fiscal stimulus of each country has not resulting the same number in GDP growth, especially in the second quarter in 2020. So viewers, President Joko Widodo said that the widening of the deficit was carried out considering that the need for state spending for health and economic management increases when state income decreases. Meanwhile, a policy of relaxing a deficit of more than 3% of GDP is still needed, of course, while maintaining prudence, credibility, and fiscal sustainability. Every year, the government always provides specific directions for the state budget, and we have summarized some of the direction for 2021 state budget in the next graphic. Let's take a look. So, direction of the 2021 state budget draft. The first one is accelerating national economic recovery due to the COVID-19 pandemic, and then the push for structural reforms to increase productivity, innovation, and economic competitiveness. And the third one is accelerating economic transformation to the digital era, and then utilization and anticipation of demographic changes. So all of the direction of 2021 state budget has been delivered by President Joko Widodo in the annual meeting in the House of Representatives last Friday. So because there will be many uncertainties, the government stated that the state budget draft must anticipate the uncertainty of world economic recovery, the volatility of commodity prices, developments in the socio-economic and geopolitical order, and the effectiveness of national economic recovery, as well as the condition and stability of the financial sector. And in the same time, the implementation of fundamental reforms must also be carried out, such as education reform, health reform, social protection reform, and reforming the budgeting and taxation system. And not only the direction, the President has also mentioned the macroeconomic assumption for 2021. Let's move on to the next graphic. So every year, government issued an assumption of macroeconomic for each year, while for 2021, President Joko Widodo said that economic growth is projected at 4.5% up to 5.5%, while inflation rate is projected at 3%. And USD IDR, or the currency for rupiah towards US dollar, is 14,600. And move on to the Indonesian crude price, or ICP oil, at 45 US dollar per barrels. And for the next year, in 2021, 10 years government bond yield is projected to hit 7%, while gas lifting 1,007,000 BOEPD and oil lifting 705,000 barrels oils per day. And this assumption of macroeconomic indicators has also delivered by the Finance Ministry. So economist Yusuf Randy considers the government's macroeconomic assumptions in the 2021 state budget draft to be quite realistic. However, he gave a note on the economic growth target, where the target jumped high from the government's prediction this year of minus 0.4% up to 1%, with a midpoint slightly above 0%. Yusuf said that economic growth during the period of economic consolidation greatly depended on the realization of government spending, where in the reflection of previous experiences of realizing state spending, it was always hampered by a number of obstacles. And this is what the government must pay attention to. And then what about the posture of state revenues and expenditures in the next year? Let's go to the next graphic. So state budget posture in 2021 draft in trillion rupiah, while revenue is projected to reach 1,776.4 trillion rupiah, and spending or expenditure in the next year in 2021, 2,747.5 trillion rupiah. So we can say that the spending is bigger than the revenue. Then the government expects the deficit to hit 971.2 trillion rupiah, or 5.5% of GDP, while it is still smaller than the deficit in 2020 at 6% of GDP. Yes, like it or not, the government decided to again use the budget deficit scheme. However, the government ensures that the 2021 budget deficit will be financed by utilizing safe and carefully managed financing sources. The government is committed to maintaining fiscal sustainability so that the level of debt remains within controllable limits. One of the contributors to the budget deficit is the National Economic Recovery Budget. How big is it? The information is in the next graphic. So in 2021 state budget draft, President Joko Widodo also said that the National Economic Recovery Program will be continued in the next year. Well, the budget has been delivered also in trillion rupiah. While we go to the first sector, healthcare is allocated 25.4 trillion rupiah, and social safety net as the second main things, 110.2 trillion rupiah. Ministries and regional government got the allocation 136.7 trillion rupiah, while SME, the government still pay attention for SME. Support for SME is allocated as much as 48.8 trillion rupiah, while corporates financing is allocated 14.9 trillion rupiah. And of course, the business sectors, the government gives the incentive for business sectors as much as 20.4 trillion rupiah. So this is the summarize of National Economic Recovery Budget for 2021. Yes, viewers, the President emphasized the main things in National Economic Recovery in 2021, namely the procurement of the COVID-19 vaccine, health facilities and infrastructures, laboratories, research and development, and BPJS contribution assistance. In addition, SME assistance will be continued through core interest subsidies, SME financing guarantees, and also placement of funds in banks. So viewers, hopefully the discussion of 2021 draft state budget by the government and the House of Representatives can be carried out constructively and produce the best results. So viewers, stay tuned on Market Headlines. We'll be right back after this break.